Hello friends, if you want to watch super hit movie The Searchers in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel friends in today's video. The movie we are going to talk about is called The Searchers. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it. All the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I am going to tell you, I am also going to give you all the information on which a platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget box office, collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film, storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. And so let's start the video. The Searchers is a 1956 American epic Western film directed by John Ford and written by Frank S. Nugent, based on the 1954 novel by Alan LeMay. It is set during the Texas Indian Wars and stars John Wayne as a middle-aged Civil War veteran who, accompanied by his adopted nephew, Jeffrey Hunter, spends years looking for his abducted niece, Natalie Wood. It was shot in VistaVision on Eastman Color Negative with processing and prints by Technicolor. The film was a critical and commercial success. Since its release, it has come to be considered a masterpiece and one of the greatest and most influential films ever made. It was named the Greatest American Western by the American Film Institute in 2008, and it placed 12th on the same organization's 2007 list of the 100 Greatest American Movies of all time. Entertainment Weekly also named it the Best Western. The British Film Institute's Sight and Sound magazine ranked it as the 7th best film of all time based on a 2012 international survey of film critics. And in 2008, the French magazine Cahiers du Cinéma ranked The Searchers number 10 in their list of the 100 best films ever made. In 1989, The Searchers was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the United States Library of Congress and selected for preservation in its National Film Registry. It was one of the first 25 films selected for the registry. The Searchers was the first major film to have a purpose-filmed making of, requested by John Ford. It deals with most aspects of making the film, including preparation of the site, construction of props, and filming techniques. Plot. In 1868, Ethan Edwards returns after an 8-year absence to the home of his brother Aaron in West Texas. Ethan fought in the Civil War on the side of the Confederacy, and in the 3 years since that war ended, he also apparently fought in the Second Franco-Mexican War. He has a lot of gold coins of uncertain origin in his possession, and a medal from the Mexican campaign that he gives to his 8-year-old niece, Debbie. As a former Confederate soldier, when he is asked to take an oath of allegiance to the Texas Rangers, he refuses. Shortly after Ethan's arrival, cattle belonging to his neighbor Lars Jorgensen are stolen, and Reverend Captain Samuel Clayton leads Ethan and a group of rangers to recover them. After discovering that the theft was a Comanche ploy to draw the men away from their families, they return and find the Edwards homestead in flames. Aaron, his wife Martha, and their son Ben are dead, while Debbie and her older sister Lucy have been abducted. After a brief funeral, the men set out in pursuit. When they find the Comanche camp, Ethan recommends a frontal attack, but Clayton insists on a stealth approach to avoid killing the hostages. The camp turns out to be deserted, and further along the trail, the men ride into an ambush. Despite fending off the attack, the Rangers are left with too few men to fight the Comanche effectively. They return home, leaving Ethan to continue his search for the girls with only Lucy's fiancé, Brad Jorgensen, and Debbie's adopted brother, Martin Pauly. Ethan finds Lucy murdered, and it is implied raped, in a canyon near the Comanche camp. In a blind rage, Brad rides directly into the camp and is killed. When winter arrives, Ethan and Martin lose the trail and return to the Jorgensen ranch. Martin is enthusiastically welcomed by the Jorgensen's daughter Lori, and Ethan finds a letter waiting for him from a trader named Futterman, who claims to have information about Debbie. Ethan, who would rather travel alone, leaves without Martin the next morning, but Lori reluctantly provides Martin with a horse to catch up. At Futterman's trading post, Ethan and Martin learn that Debbie has been taken by Scar, the chief of the Noyeka band of Comanches. A year or more later, Lori receives a letter from Martin describing the ongoing search. Reading the letter aloud, Lori narrates the next few scenes, in which Ethan kills Futterman for trying to steal his money, and Martin accidentally buys a Comanche wife who runs away when she hears Scar's name. Later, she is among the dead when the two men find a portion of Scar's band killed by soldiers. In New Mexico territory, they find Debbie after 5 years, now an adolescent, living as one of Scar's wives. She says that she has become a Comanche and wishes to remain with them. Ethan would rather see her dead than living as a Native American, and tries to shoot her. But Martin shields her with his body, and a Comanche wounds Ethan with an arrow as they escape. Although Martin tends to Ethan's wound, he is furious with him for attempting to kill Debbie. Later, they return home. Meanwhile, Charlie McCory has been courting Laurie in Martin's absence. Ethan and Martin arrive home just as Charlie and Laurie's wedding is about to begin. After a fistfight between Martin and Charlie, a nervous Yankee soldier, Lieutenant Greenhill, brings news that Ethan's friend Mose Harper has located Scar. Clayton leads his men to the Comanche camp, this time for a direct attack, but Martin is allowed to sneak in ahead of the assault to find Debbie, who welcomes him. Martin kills Scar to save Debbie. Ethan, finding Scar's body, scalps him for revenge. Ethan then finds Debbie and pursues her on horseback. Martin chases them desperately, fearing that Ethan will shoot her. Instead, Ethan sweeps her up into his arms and takes her to the Jorgensen ranch, where Martin reunites with Laurie. While everyone else enters the house, Ethan watches, then walks out. Cast John Wayne as Ethan Edwards, Jeffrey Hunter as Martin Pauly, Vera Miles as Laurie Jorgensen, Ward Bond as Reveners Captrice Samuel Johnson Clayton, Natalie Wood as adult Debbie Edwards, John Quallen as Lars Jorgensen, Olive Carey as Mrs. Jorgensen, Henry Brandon as Chief Scar, Ken Curtis as Charlie McCory, Harry Carey Jr. as Brad Jorgensen, Antonio Moreno as Emilio Gabriel Fernandez y Figueroa, Hank Worden as Mose Harper, Nebula Archuleta as Wild Goose, Flying in the Night Sky, Look, Walter Coy as Aaron Edwards, Dorothy Jordan as Martha Edwards, Pippa Scott as Lucy Edwards, Patrick Wayne as Lutine Greenhill, Lana Wood as Young Debbie Edwards, Robert Lydon as Ben Edwards, Chuck Robertson as Texas Ranger at Wedding, Jack Pennick as Sergeant at Fort, Peter Mamakos as Jerem Futterman. Production. Producers and film crew. The Searchers was the first production from distinguished turfman C.V. Whitney. It was directed by John Ford and distributed by Warner Brothers. Behind the camera film crew included cinematographer Wynton C. Hoke and editor Jack Murray. The Searchers is the first of only 3 films produced by Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney's C.V. Whitney Pictures. The second was The Missouri Traveler in 1958 with Brandon DeWilde and Lee Marvin, and the last was The Young Land in 1959 with Wayne's son Patrick Wayne and Dennis Hopper. Filming locations. While the film was primarily set in the Staked Plains, Llano Estacado of northwestern Texas, it was actually filmed in Monument Valley, Arizona, Utah. Additional scenes were filmed in Mexican Hat, Utah, in Bronson Canyon in Griffith Park, Los Angeles, and in Elk Island National Park. The film was shot in the VistaVision widescreen process. Ford originally wanted to cast Fess Parker, whose performance as Davy Crockett on television had helped spark a national craze for the Martin Pauly role, but Walt Disney, to whom Parker was under contract, refused to allow it and did not tell Parker about the offer, according to Parker's videotaped interview for the Archive of American Television. Parker has said retrospectively that this was easily his worst career reversal. Monument Valley. Promotion. As part of its promotion of The Searchers in 1956, Warner Brothers produced and broadcast one of the first behind-the-scenes making-of programs in movie history, which aired in 1956 as an episode of its Warner Brothers Presents TV series. Historical background. Author Alan LeMay's surviving research notes indicate that the 2 characters who go in search of a missing girl were inspired by Britton Johnson, an African-American teamster who ransomed his captured wife and children from the Comanches in 1865. Afterward, Johnson made at least 3 trips to Indian Territory in Kansas, relentlessly searching for another kidnapped girl, Millie Durgan, or Durkin, until Kiowa raiders killed him in 1871. Several film critics have suggested that The Searchers was inspired by the 1836 kidnapping of 9-year-old Cynthia Ann Parker by Comanche warriors, who raided her family's home at Fort Parker, Texas. She spent 24 years with the Comanches, married a war chief, and had 3 children, one of whom was the famous Comanche chief Quanah Parker, only to be rescued against her will by Texas Rangers. James W. Parker, Cynthia Ann's uncle, spent much of his life and fortune in what became an obsessive search for his niece, much like Ethan Edwards in the film. In addition, the rescue of Cynthia Ann, during a Texas Ranger attack known as the Battle of Pease River, resembles the rescue of Debbie Edwards when the Texas Rangers attacked Scar's village. Parker's story was only one of 64 real-life cases of 19th-century child abductions in Texas that author Alan LeMay studied, while researching the novel on which the film was based. The ending of LeMay's novel contrasts to the film's, with Debbie running from the white men and the Native Americans. Marty, in one final leg of his search, finds her days later, only after she has fainted from exhaustion. Some film critics have speculated that the historical model for the cavalry attack on a Comanche village, resulting in Luke's death and the taking of Comanche prisoners to a military post, was the well-known Battle of Washita River, November 27, 1868, when Lieutenant George Armstrong Custer's 7th U.S. Cavalry attacked Black Kettle's Cheyenne camp on the Washita River, near present-day Cheyenne, Oklahoma. The sequence also resembles the 1872 Battle of the North Fork of the Red River, in which the 4th Cavalry captured 24 Comanche women and children and imprisoned them at Fort Concho. Reception: contemporaneous reviews. Upon the film's release, Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called it a rip-snorting Western, in spite of the excessive language in its ads. He credits Ford's familiar corps of actors, writers, etc., who help to give the gusto to this film. From Frank S. Nugent, whose screenplay from the novel of Alan LeMay is a pungent thing, right on through the cast and technicians, it is the honest achievement of a well-knit team. Crowther noted, "Two faults of minor moment. Episode is piled upon episode, climax upon climax, and corpse upon corpse. The justification for it is that it certainly conveys the lengthiness of the hunt, but it leaves one a mite exhausted, especially with the speed at which it goes. The director has permitted too many outdoor scenes to be set in the obviously synthetic surroundings of the studio stage. Some of those campfire scenes could have been shot in a sporting goods store window." Variety called it handsomely mounted and in the tradition of Shane, yet somewhat disappointing due to its length and repetitiveness. The John Ford directorial stamp is unmistakable. It concentrates on the characters and establishes a definite mood. It's not sufficient, however, to overcome many of the weaknesses of the story. The New York Herald-Tribune termed the movie distinguished. Newsweek deemed it remarkable. Look described The Searchers as a Homeric odyssey. The New York Times praised Wayne's performance as uncommonly commanding. The Monthly Film Bulletin wrote, "Though it does not consistently achieve the highest Ford standards, The Searchers is surely the best Western since Shane." The film earned rentals of $4.8 million in the U.S. and Canada during its first year of release. The film helped revive the career of Jeffrey Hunter. Later assessments. Critic Roger Ebert found Wayne's character, Ethan Edwards, one of the most compelling characters Ford and Wayne ever created. Ebert writes, "The Searchers indeed seems to be two films. The Ethan Edwards story is stark and lonely, a portrait of obsession, and in it we can see Schrader's inspiration for Travis Bickle of Taxi Driver. The film within this film involves the silly romantic subplot and characters hauled in for comic relief, including the Swedish neighbor Lars Jorgensen, John Quaylen, who uses a vaudeville accent, and Mose Harper, Hank Worden, a half-wit treated like a mascot. This second strand is without interest, and those who value The Searchers filter it out, patiently waiting for a return to the main storyline. The Searchers has been cited as one of the greatest films of all time, such as in the BFI's decennial Sight and Sound polls. In 1972, The Searchers was ranked 18th, in 1992, 5th, in 2002, 11th, in 2012, 7th. In a 1959 Cahiers du Cinéma essay, Jean-Luc Godard compared the movie's ending to the reuniting of Odysseus with Telemachus in Homer's Odyssey. In 1963, he ranked The Searchers as the 4th greatest American movie of the sound era, after Scarface, 1932, The Great Dictator, 1940, and Vertigo, 1958. The 1998 American Film Institute 100 Greatest American Films list ranked The Searchers in 96th place, and the 2007 iteration of the list ranked it in 12th place. In 1998, TV Guide ranked it 18th. In 2008, the American Film Institute named The Searchers as the greatest Western of all time. In 2010, Richard Corliss noted the film was now widely regarded as the greatest Western of the 1950s, the genre's greatest decade, and characterized it as a darkly profound study of obsession, racism, and heroic solitude. The film currently maintains an 87% rating on the review aggregate website Rotten Tomatoes based on 98 reviews, with an average rating of 9.1 per 10. The site's critics' consensus reads, "The Searchers is an epic John Wayne Western that introduces dark ambivalence to the genre that remains fashionable today." On Metacritic, the film has a score of 94 out of 100 based on reviews from 15 critics, indicating universal acclaim. On They Shoot Pictures. Don't they, a site which numerically calculates critical reception for any given film, The Searchers has been recognized as the 9th most acclaimed movie ever made. Members of the Western Writers of America chose its title song as one of the top 100 Western songs of all time. Scott McGee stated, "True. More than just making a social statement like other Westerns of the period were apt to do, Ford instills in The Searchers a visual poetry and a sense of melancholy that is rare in American films, and rarer still to Westerns." Glenn Frankel's 2013 study of the film calls it the greatest Hollywood film that few people have seen. Critical interpretations. Race relations. A major theme of the film is the historical attitude of white settlers toward Native Americans. Ford was not the first to attempt this examination cinematically, but his depiction of harshness toward Native Americans was startling, particularly to later generations of viewers. Roger Ebert wrote, "I think Ford was trying, imperfectly, even nervously, to depict racism that justified genocide." At the heart of The Searchers is Wayne's performance as the angry, vengeful Ethan Edwards. From the beginning of his quest, he is quite clearly less interested in rescuing Debbie than in wreaking vengeance on the Comanches for the slaughter of his brother's family. In a 1964 interview with Cosmopolitan, Ford said, "There's some merit to the charge that the Indian hasn't been portrayed accurately or fairly in the Western, but again, this charge has been a broad generalization and often unfair. The Indian didn't welcome the white man, and he wasn't diplomatic. If he has been treated unfairly by whites in films, that, unfortunately, was often the case in real life. There was much racial prejudice in the West." Film scholar Ed Lowry writes, "While the Comanches are depicted as utterly ruthless, Ford ascribes motivations for their actions and lends them a dignity befitting a proud civilization. Never do we see the Indian commit atrocities more appalling than those perpetrated by the white man. Wayne is plainly Ahab," wrote cultural critic Greil Marcus. "He is the good American hero, driving himself past all known limits and into madness, his commitment to honor and decency burned down to a core of vengeance." For Brenton Priestley, Ford indicates that Scar's cruelty is also motivated by revenge. "Two sons killed by white men. For each son, I take many scalps." Miscegenation. The theme of miscegenation also runs through the film. Many critical analyses of The Searchers highlight Ethan's view of Debbie as having been contaminated through her abduction and implied rape. The rape of captive white women by the Comanche is an unspoken theme. No actual rape scene is depicted, but Alexandra Heller Nicholas in her study of rape revenge films says, "The abduction, captivity, and implied rape of Debbie, Natalie Wood, drives the narrative," and Edward Buscombe points out a scene in which Ethan turns off the trail to penetrate a narrow crevice in the rocks, and when he emerges, his savage stabbing with his knife seems to mimic a violent sexual act, drawing us a picture of the act of rape, which obsesses him. Glenn Frankel writes that in real life, rape was a fact of life for many captives, although it was seldom discussed by those women who escaped or were ransomed back to the white world. Early on, Martin earns a sour look from Ethan when he admits to being 1/8 Cherokee. Ethan says repeatedly that he will kill his niece rather than have her live with a buck, that living with the Comanche ain't living. Even one of the film's gentler characters, Vera Miles's Lori, tells Martin when he explains he must protect his adoptive sister, Ethan will put a bullet in her brain. "I tell you, Martha would want him to." This outburst makes it clear that even the supposedly gentler characters hold the same fear of miscegenation. Randy Roberts and James Olson write that Ethan Edwards was also an obsessed maniac. White settlers are not simply the advanced vanguard of civilization. They are racists. Indians are not just noble savages. They are savage killers. The frontier is not a place of opportunity. It is a wasteland. In the character of Ethan Edwards, John Wayne had extended the Western hero to the border of evil. Ethan and Martha. An important plot undercurrent is the obvious mutual attraction between Ethan Edwards and his brother's wife, Martha. Although no dialogue alludes to it, many visual references to their relationship are seen throughout the film. Some critics have suggested that this unspoken passion implies that Debbie, who is specifically described as 8 years old, as Ethan returns from an 8-year absence, may be Ethan's daughter. Such a situation would add further layers of nuance to Ethan's obsessive search for Debbie, his revulsion at the thought that she might be living as a Native American, and his ultimate decision to bring her home, and then walk away. Beyond the ostensible motivations, it might depict a guilt-ridden father's need to save the daughter he made by cuckolding his brother, then abandoned. Influence. The Searchers has influenced many films. David Lean watched the film repeatedly while preparing for Lawrence of Arabia to help him get a sense of how to shoot a landscape. The entrance of Ethan Edwards in The Searchers, across a vast prairie, is echoed in the across-the-desert entrance of Sheriff Ali in Lawrence of Arabia. Sam Peckinpah referenced the aftermath of the massacre and the funeral scene in Major Dundee, 1965, and according to a 1974 review by Jay Cox, Peckinpah's Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia contains dialogue with direct tributes to such classics as John Huston's The Treasure of the Sierra Madre and John Ford's The Searchers. Martin Scorsese's 1967 film Who's That Knocking at My Door features a sequence in which the two primary characters discuss The Searchers. In 2012, in a Sight and Sound poll, Scorsese listed The Searchers as one of his all-time favorite films. Scott McGee, writing for Turner Classic Movies, notes, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, John Milius, Paul Schrader, Wim Wenders, Jean-Luc Godard, and George Lucas have all been influenced and paid some form of homage to The Searchers in their work. Wenders' Palme d'Or-winning 1984 film, Paris, Texas in particular, has been cited for similarities. The film influenced several aspects of George Lucas's film saga Star Wars. The scene in which Ethan Edwards discovers the flaming wreckage of his family homestead is reflected in 1977's Star Wars, wherein the character Luke Skywalker finds that his homestead has been burned and destroyed by Imperial stormtroopers. The Searchers was also an influence on the 2002 prequel film in the series, Star Wars Episode II, Attack of the Clones. In the film, Anakin Skywalker learns that one of his family members has been abducted by a group of Tusken Raiders, though the character's mother is kidnapped rather than a niece. Anakin massacres the kidnappers in vengeance, much like the Searchers' climactic battle in the Comanche camp. The opening scenes of Rogue One mirror those of the Searchers. The pigtailed character of Jyn is hidden by her parents when their homestead is attacked. In the same way, little Debbie is saved by her parents when they are attacked by the Comanches. Douglas Gordon's 1995 artwork, 5-Year Drive-By, stretches out The Searchers from the original 113-minute runtime to 5 years, reflecting the events of the movie taking place over a time span of 5 years, playing at a speed of 1 frame every 24 minutes. The 2007 film, Searchers 2.0 by Alex Cox, includes many discussions of The Searchers as well as other revenge films. In the film, the characters attend a screening of a remake of The Searchers directed by Ted Post and starring James Mitchum as Ethan Edwards and Telly Savalas as Chief Cicatrice, Scar, though no such remake was ever made in reality. Ted Post had actually directed a remake of John Ford's Stagecoach. Breaking Bad creator Vince Gilligan stated that the ending to the show's final episode, Felina, was influenced by the film. The 2016 Canadian film Searchers is a partial remake of the film, in which an Inuk man in 1913 finds his wife and daughter have been kidnapped. However, co-director Zacharias Kunuk discarded the original's plot about conflicts between white people and indigenous peoples, instead using only Inuit characters. Kunuk explained racism was not an intended theme of his film. Kunuk said he watched Western films in the Igloolik Community Hall as a boy and declared, "The Searchers starred John Wayne was our hero." John Wayne's repeatedly used line, "That'll be the day," inspired Buddy Holly to write the song "That'll Be the Day" after seeing the film in a theater in Lubbock, Texas. The title of the novel The Searcher by Tana French is an allusion to the film. John Ford's The Searchers contains scenes of magnificence and one of John Wayne's best performances. There are shots that are astonishingly beautiful. A cover story in New York Magazine called it the most influential movie in American history. And yet, at its center is a difficult question, because the Wayne character is racist without apology, and so, in a less outspoken way, are the other white characters. Is the film intended to endorse their attitudes or to dramatize and regret them? Today we see it through enlightened eyes, but in 1956, many audiences accepted its harsh view of Indians. The film is about an obsessive quest. The niece of Ethan Edwards, Wayne, is kidnapped by Comanches who murder her family and burn their ranch house. Ethan spends 5 years on a lonely quest to hunt down the tribe that holds the girl Debbie, Natalie Wood, not to rescue her, but to shoot her dead, because she has become the leavings of a Comanche buck. Ford knew that his hero's hatred of Indians was wrong, but his glorification of Ethan's search invites admiration for a twisted man. Defenders of the film point to the famous scene where Ethan embraces his niece instead of killing her. Can one shot redeem a film? Ethan's quest inspired a plotline in George Lucas's Star Wars. It's at the center of Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, written by Paul Schrader, who used it again in his own Hardcore. The hero in each of the Schrader screenplays is a loner, driven to violence and madness by his mission to rescue a young white woman who has become the sexual prey of those seen as subhuman. Harry Dean Stanton's search for Nastassja Kinski in Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas is a reworking of the Ford story. Even Ethan's famous line, "That'll be the day," inspired a song by Buddy Holly. The Searchers was made in the dying days of the classic Western, which faltered when Indians ceased to be typecast as savages. Revisionist Westerns, including Ford's own Cheyenne Autumn in 1964, took a more enlightened view of Native Americans. But the Western audience didn't want moral complexity. Like the audience for today's violent thrillers and urban warfare pictures, it wanted action with clear-cut bad guys. The movie was based on a novel by Alan LeMay and a script by Ford's son-in-law, Frank Nugent, the one-time film critic who wrote 10 Ford films, including She Wore a Yellow Ribbon and Wagon Master. It starred John Wayne, who worked with Pappy Ford in 14 major films, as a Confederate soldier who boasts that he never surrendered, who in post-war years becomes a wanderer, who arrives at the ranch of his brother Aaron, Walter Coit, and his wife, Martha, Dorothy Jordan, under a cloud. He carries golden coins that may be stolen, and Sheriff Sam Clayton, Ward Bond, says he fits a lot of descriptions. It is clear from the way Ethan's eyes follow Martha around the room that he secretly loves her. His hatred of Indians flares the moment he meets Martin Pauly, Jeffrey Hunter. "Hell, I could mistake you for a half-breed." Martin says he's 1/8 Comanche. Ethan rescued young Martin when his family was killed by Indians and left him with Martha and Aaron to be raised. But it's clear he thinks 1/8 is too much. When Martin insists on joining Ethan's search for the captured Debbie, Ethan says, "I give the orders," and treats the younger man with contempt. In a saloon, Ethan pours out drinks but snatches away Martin's glass, snarling, "Wait till you grow up." Martin at this point has been a ranch hand, is engaged to be married, has been on the trail with Ethan for years. Does Ethan privately think it's dangerous for a half-breed to drink? One of the mysteries of The Searchers involves the relationship between Ethan and Martin on the trail. Living alone with each other for months at a time, sleeping under the stars, what did they talk about? How could they share a mission and not find common cause as men? Martin's function on the trail is to argue for Debbie's life, since Ethan intends to find her and kill her. The younger man also figures in a romantic subplot awkwardly cobbled onto the main story. He is engaged to marry Lori, Vera Miles, the daughter of friendly Swedish neighbors. Ford goes for cornball humor in scenes where Martin writes to Lori only once in 5 years, and in that letter makes light of having mistakenly purchased a squaw bride. Martin returns on the very day when Lori, who never expected to see him again, is scheduled to marry Charlie, Ken Curtis, a hayseed, and the men fight for the women in a sequence that would be more at home in 7 Brides for 7 Brothers than in an epic Western. The Searchers indeed seems to be 2 films. The Ethan Edwards story is stark and lonely, a portrait of obsession, and in it we can see Schrader's inspiration for Travis Bickle of Taxi Driver. The Comanche chief named Scar, Henry Brandon, is paralleled by Harvey Keitel's pimp named Sport, whose Western hat and long hair caused Travis to call him Chief. Ethan doesn't like Indians, and says so plainly. When he reveals his intention to kill Debbie, Martin says, "She's alive and she's gonna stay alive." And Ethan growls, "Living with Comanches ain't being alive." He slaughters buffalo in a shooting frenzy, saying, "At least they won't feed any Comanche this winter." The film within this film involves the silly romantic subplot and characters hauled in for comic relief, including the Swedish neighbor Lars Jorgensen, John Quallen, who uses a vaudeville accent, and Mose Harper, Hank Worden, a half-wit treated like a mascot. There are even musical interludes. This second strand is without interest, and those who value The Searchers filter it out, patiently waiting for a return to the main storyline. Ethan Edwards, fierce, alone, a defeated soldier with no role in peacetime, is one of the most compelling characters Ford and Wayne ever created. They worked together on 14 films. Did they know how vile Ethan's attitudes were? I would argue that they did, because Wayne was in his personal life notably free of racial prejudice, and because Ford made films with more sympathetic views of Indians. This is not the instinctive, oblivious racism of Griffith's Birth of a Nation. Countless Westerns have had racism as the unspoken premise. This one consciously focuses on it. I think it took a certain amount of courage to cast Wayne as a character whose heroism was tainted. Ethan's redemption is intended to be shown in that dramatic shot of reunion with Debbie, where he takes her in his broad hands, lifts her up to the sky, drops her down into his arms, and says, "Let's go home, Debbie." The shot is famous and beloved, but small counterbalance to his views throughout the film, and indeed there is no indication he thinks any differently about Indians. John Ford, 1895-1973, was Hollywood's greatest chronicler of American history, and there was a period when his The Grapes of Wrath, 1940, and not Citizen Kane, was cited as the best American film. He worked on his first film in 1914 and was directing by 1917. He had an unrivaled eye for landscape and famously used Monument Valley as the location for his westerns, camping out with cast and crew, the company eating from a chuck wagon and sleeping in tents. Wayne told me that making a Ford Western was like living in a Western. Ford's eye for composition was bold and sure. Consider the funeral early in the film, with a wagon at low right, a cluster of mourners in the middle left, then a diagonal up the hill to the grave, as they all sing Ford's favorite hymn, "Shall We Gather at the River?" He used it again in the wedding scene. Consider one of the most famous of all Ford shots, the search party in a valley as Indians ominously ride parallel to them, silhouetted against the sky, and the dramatic first sight of the adult Debbie running down the side of a sand dune behind Ethan, who doesn't see her. The opening and closing shots of Ethan arriving and leaving framed in a doorway. The poignancy with which he stands alone at the door, one hand on the opposite elbow, forgotten for a moment after delivering Debbie home. These shots are among the treasures of the cinema. In The Searchers, I think Ford was trying imperfectly, even nervously, to depict racism that justified genocide. The comic relief may be an unconscious attempt to soften the message. Many members of the original audience probably missed his purpose. Ethan's racism was invisible to them because they bought into his view of Indians. 8 years later, in Cheyenne Autumn, his last film, Ford was more clear. But in the flawed vision of The Searchers, we can see Ford, Wayne, and the Western itself awkwardly learning that a man who hates Indians can no longer be an uncomplicated hero. When people ask me what kind of films I like, I never know what to say. I like everything. Total trash, high art, comedy, horror, British realism, Czech surrealism, Hong Kong action, Hungarian inaction, you name it. But if there's one kind of film I've never really loved, it's Westerns. Sure, I've seen some great ones, but as a genre, it has never really appealed. I'm not American. I'm not into guns. And the demonization and slaughter of indigenous peoples doesn't really grab me. Most of all, I've never really liked John Wayne. I think of him as the personification of humorless, swaggering, macho Hollywood conservatism, a supporter of McCarthyite anti-communist witch hunts, gun rights, the Vietnam War, Ronald Reagan, and white supremacism. In a 1971 Playboy interview, Wayne said, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." And I recall anecdotes about how he stole his whole drawling cowboy shtick off the veteran stuntman Yakima Canutt. He did have a great voice, though. All of this goes some way to explaining why I've never seen The Searchers, despite its reputation as the greatest Western, if not one of the greatest movies, ever. I've never seen any of John Ford's movies, in fact. Maybe if I watch it, I'll finally fall in love with the genre. As Wayne might put it, that'll be the day. I broadly knew the plot of The Searchers already. White girl is kidnapped by Native Americans. John Wayne goes off looking for her. For a long time. I'm not sure if he finds her, but I'm willing to bet he finds himself. I'd factored in a little outdated prejudice, but oh my God, The Searchers is one of the most fantastically racist movies I've ever seen. Things start out well enough. The opening shot is a wonder to behold. Here's the silhouette of a woman in the doorway of her wooden cabin, emerging onto a dazzlingly sunlit porch, and one of the most iconic views in cinema, Monument Valley. The landscape throughout the film is jaw-dropping. America is just stunningly beautiful. Add in Technicolor and VistaVision, and it looks hyper-really perfect. Cornflower blue skies like a touched-up vintage postcard, the deep, rich hues of rock and wood. Ford makes terrific use of the landscape, rhyming the isolated peaks with his rugged, isolated characters in the frame. The horsework, that's a technical term, is also amazing. Orchestrated streams of riders surge across the screen, scaling precipices and plummeting down them. The action is epic, and all the more exciting for the lack of fakery. Although, is it speeded up? There probably aren't enough skilled stunt riders to do this kind of thing anymore. But then there's Wayne. Everyone is in high spirits when his character Ethan returns from the Civil War, albeit under suspicious circumstances, until he reminds them what an unapologetic racist he is. When Ethan's adoptive nephew Martin, who is an 8th Cherokee, sits down at the dinner table, Ethan goes all surly. "A fella could mistake you for a half-breed," he sneers. Ethan hates the Injuns with a passion, even before they come and ransack the family homestead and make off with 2 young women. He knows a surprising amount about their culture, but has no respect for it. When he finds a dead Comanche, he shoots out his eyes so that he won't be able to wander the spirit lands. He'd fit right in at Abu Ghraib. I'm not warming to him. As well as a racist, Ethan is an asshole. Not just to Martin, to everyone. He's quick to punch people or chuck stuff at them. He gets sulky when he's not in charge. He's also utterly lacking in compassion. Look how he delivers the news to fellow searcher Brad that he has found the corpse of his fiancée Lucy. When Brad asks for more details, Ethan flies into a rage. "What do you want me to do? Draw you a picture? Don't ever ask me." Like he's the real victim. It's not just Ethan, though. The searchers as a whole seems to hate them Injuns. The plot contrives to demonize them from the outset by barely identifying them as individuals and having them kidnap innocent white girls, thus affording Wayne and co. a patch of moral high ground they don't really deserve. Running through the film is a deep-seated paranoia about racial purity. Any dilution of whiteness is considered mortifying, from Martin's half-breed status to the traumatized captives Ethan helps liberate, but considers ruined by their exposure to the Comanches. "It's hard to believe they're white," a cavalryman says. "They ain't anymore," snarls Ethan. The same applies to the missing Debbie. Ethan's obsession is driven by a desire not to rescue her, but to kill her for going over to the other side. There are only 2 significant Native American characters: Scar, the mysterious chief of the kidnapping Comanche tribe, intriguingly played by blue-eyed Jewish actor Henry Brandon, who at least gets to explain that he has lost sons to white enemies, and look, Beulah Archuleta, the bride Martin mistakenly acquires during a bartering session. This is the only thing in the movie that makes Wayne's character laugh. Look inexplicably dotes on Martin, smiling coyly, batting her eyelashes at him, and serving him coffee. He literally boots her out of his bed, which Ethan finds hilarious. Look is later killed in a raid, which is convenient for Martin's marriage prospects. Martin's whole romantic subplot is played as jaunty comedy and doesn't really sit with, well, the heavy central story. In its defense, the film hardly portrays Ethan as a hero. He's clearly a psycho, as well as a racist haunted by past traumas, ultimately becoming the savage he views the Native Americans to be. So you could argue The Searchers is more a study of racism than a racist movie. But is that good enough? When the hero's climactic moment of change is his decision not to kill his niece for not being white enough, that's not really saying a lot, is it? It's the old, "Isn't it great how this objectionable racist has become slightly less racist?" A device that's still in use today. See Green Book. That might have made white America feel better about itself in 1956, with the Second World War a recent memory and the civil rights struggle heating up. But it wasn't enough to wash the sour taste out of my mouth today. All the same, I have to admire Wayne for agreeing to play such an unappealing character. He commands the screen effortlessly, never overselling Ethan's torment and obsession. Is my dislike of him driven by my own prejudices? If so, I'm no better than him. If not, then it's down to the strength of his performance. Either way, I was wrong. Reading up afterwards, I discovered that during the shoot, Wayne found Beulah Archuleta crying alone in a tent one day. It turned out she was going to miss her son's wedding. Wayne promptly halted production and flew Archuleta back to California so she could attend. Perhaps there's a soul beneath that leathery machismo after all. The Searchers might not be the beginning of my love affair with Westerns, but I'm not some saddle-sore old grouch who's happy to plod on, stewing in my own resentment. No, like Ethan, I can change. Maybe there's another Western out there that will cement my appreciation for the genre. I'll keep on searching. It may take some time. The box office appeal of John Wayne combined with the imprint of John Ford makes The Searchers a contender for the big money stakes. It's a Western in the grand scale, handsomely mounted and in the tradition of Shane. The VistaVision Technicolor photographic excursion through the Southwest Presenting in bold and colorful outline the arid country and areas of buttes and giant rock formations is eye-filling and impressive. Yet The Searchers is somewhat disappointing. There is a feeling that it could have been so much more. Overlong and repetitious at 119 minutes, there are subtleties in the basically simple story that are not adequately explained. There are, however, some fine vignettes of frontier life in the early Southwest and a realistic presentation of the difficulties faced by the settlers in carving out a homestead in dangerous Indian country. First CV Whitney picture for Warner Brothers release involves a long, arduous trek through primitive country by two men in search of 9-year-old girl kidnapped by hostile Comanche Indians. They achieve their purpose after 5 years of determined prowling, punctuated by privation, skirmishes with Indians, armed battles with treacherous informants, and occasional returns to their Texas home base. Wayne, the uncle of the kidnapped girl, is a complex character. His motivations from the time he appears out of the Southwest Plains at his brother's ranch to his similar exit after he accomplishes his mission are unclear. There are vague hints of a romance with his sister-in-law, an antagonistic relationship with his brother, and a feud with Ward Bond, a combination preacher and captain of the Texas Rangers. Wayne is a bitter, taciturn individual throughout, and the reasons for his attitude are left to the imagination of the viewer. All that is known about him is that he fought in the Civil War and did not return home until 3 years after the war ended. There are indications that he wandered endlessly and did many things before deciding to return home. His bitterness towards the Indians is understandable. They massacred his brother's family, except for the kidnapped girl, and destroyed the ranch. However, his reaction to the girl when she is finally found seems peculiar. He feels the girl has been defiled by the Indians during her years with them and is determined to kill her. He rides her down, and as she lies helplessly on the ground, he approaches menacingly with his gun drawn. At the last moment, he changes his mind, lowers his gun, picks her up tenderly, and returns her to a friendly ranch family. With his task finished, he rides off. Wayne's partner in the search is Jeffrey Hunter, who has been cared for by Wayne's brother since the young man's family was massacred by the Comanches. Hunter and a rancher's daughter, Vera Miles, provide the romantic interest, and the former is also involved in labored attempts at comedy relief, such as the purchase of a squaw instead of a blanket and a knockdown fight with Ken Curtis, his rival for Miss Miles's affections. Wayne is fine in the role of the hard-bitten, misunderstood, and mysterious searcher, and the rest of the cast acquits itself notably, including Hunter and Miss Miles. Also stand out are Bond as the colorful, top-hatted preacher captain, Hank Worden as a tetched old Indian scout, John Quallen as a rancher, Harry Carey Jr. as Quallen's son, Olive Carey as Quallen's wife, and Henry Brandon as the hostile Indian chief. The John Ford directorial stamp is unmistakable. It concentrates on the characters and establishes a definite mood. It's not sufficient, however, to overcome many of the weaknesses of the story. Winton C. Hodge's VistaVision lensing and other technical aspects are of top-notch quality. The Searchers is a landmark Hollywood Western from John Ford, probably the best of the bunch. It's a Technicolor marvel in shades of psychological gray, a revisionist take on the myth of manifest destiny. It's full of savagery and tragedy, blood and thunder. I know this because I've read all about it, and this made me feel I knew the film in advance. But either the critics were wrong, or I had bamboozled myself. The Searchers was my all-time favorite Western until the moment I saw it. Ford's 1956 film casts Foursquare John Wayne in the role of Foursquare Ethan Edwards, a Civil War veteran on the trail of murderous Comanche. Edwards is in pursuit of his niece Debbie, Natalie Wood, who was abducted as a child and now lives as a squaw of Scar, the chief. Except that it turns out that Edwards does not want to rescue Debbie, he wants to murder her, because what she has done so offends his sense of decency. Living with a Comanche ain't living, he says. And just writing this paragraph, I find that I'm excited all over again. Edwards searches for Debbie for years and years. I searched for The Searchers for 12 months or so. The more I read about it, the more I wanted to find it. The plot sounded tremendous, and everyone else seemed to love it. The Searchers is one of Martin Scorsese's favorite films. It influenced David Lean and Steven Spielberg, and latterly the final episode of Breaking Bad. Jean-Luc Godard hailed it as a Homeric odyssey, while the critic Greil Marcus likened Ethan to Captain Ahab, an American hero gone mad. In pursuing the monster, he becomes the monster himself. One Sunday afternoon, I found a film called The Searchers, and it bore a passing resemblance to the film I'd been chasing. but it was as if the searchers had died on the trail and then been boiled down and made into a soup. Here was John Wayne just being John Wayne, waddling through the action with none of the nuance or conflict that Ethan is meant to embody. He says he wants to save Debbie. Then he says he wants to kill Debbie. And then he says to Debbie, "Let's go home." But he might as well be reading his lines off a cue card. I don't think he understands the man he is playing or the story he's telling. Worse, I'm not entirely convinced that the director does either. Ford, of course, was one of the great myth makers of the Wild West. He printed the legend and mapped out the frontier, on screen if not physically. As a young man, he played a KKK horseman in The Birth of a Nation and typically viewed U.S. history as a war against barbarism, the taming of the wilderness. The white men were the good guys, the people of color, the beasts. On The Searchers, significantly, he tried something new. For perhaps the first time, Ford entertained the possibility that the settlers and the Native Americans might be as bad as each other. Or, to put it another way, that by scalping his victims, angry Ethan Edwards was no better than a red Indian savage. That's progress of a sort, although the journey is shuffling, conflicted, and doesn't go far enough. It's fine for Ford to be ambivalent about the material. Ambivalence can lead us to fascinating places. In this case, however, the confusion serves only to dampen the drama. Wayne is all wrong, and the tone is a mess. It feels as if Ford is cooking the right kind of movie with the wrong set of ingredients. So, what happened next? My suspicion is that critics and fans stepped in to complete the film for him. They saw the direction The Searchers was going and rushed to convince themselves that it had achieved what it set out to do, or at least what they believed it had set out to do. They misinterpreted a tentative shuffle step as a giant leap forward and hailed the film as a revisionist masterpiece as opposed to a stumbling reconnaissance. When we sit down in a cinema, we are often watching two pictures, the picture on screen and the one we want it to be. Sometimes the picture on screen surpasses our expectations. It blows off the roof and lifts us up with it. But other times it does not. When I tracked down The Searchers, I truly wanted to love it. I believed that I would. But I had read too much and thought too much, to the point where I dreamed up a whole different movie, possibly one scripted by Cormac McCarthy. So if Ford's film felt like a letdown, that's not really its fault. I'm blaming the critics. They spoiled The Searchers for me. One of Warner Archive's most anticipated releases is here, a 4K Ultra HD edition of John Ford's 1956 classic The Searchers, which features a beautiful restoration of the movie, along with a couple new bonus features and plenty of legacy extras. Highly recommended. As Akira Kurosawa is best remembered for his samurai movies, so is John Ford well regarded for the westerns he directed. Both of them helmed a variety of other kinds of films, of course, but it's not so bad in the grand scheme of things to be remembered for a specific genre, especially when one does it so well. Does it so well is an apt description of Ford's deft handling of The Searchers, his classic 1956 Western, written by Frank S. Nugent and based on the 1954 novel of the same name by Alan LeMay. On its surface, it may seem like a stereotypical cowboys versus Indians movie, complete with those well-known bugle notes as the cavalry rides in to help save the day. However, as with many of Ford's movies, The Searchers is much more than that. John Wayne plays the role of Ethan Edwards, a racist ex-Confederate soldier who arrives at the home of his brother Aaron, Walter Coy, in 1868, after having not seen him for 8 years. Aaron is married to Martha, Dorothy Jordan, and they have 3 children, including 2 girls, Lucy, Pippa Scott, and Debbie, Lana Wood. Her sister Natalie plays the older version of Debbie. After a Comanche Indian attack on their home leaves the parents and 1 child dead with the 2 girls abducted, Ethan leads a group in search of them. That group eventually turns into just Ethan and Martin, Jeffrey Hunter, who was best known as Star Trek's Captain Pike, Debbie's adopted older brother, seeking the whereabouts of both girls. Others question the pair's motive in continuing what seems to be a fruitless search, but Ethan in particular has his own bigoted reasons for seeking vengeance at any cost. Some aspects of The Searchers don't play well with modern sensibilities, especially the movie's treatment of women. Yes, that's unfortunately how women were treated in the late 1900s, but they weren't in much better shape in the 1950s either. Ethan's racism is also troubling, of course, especially given some of the views John Wayne espoused. But his character does undergo an arc of change, and the film's famous final shot makes it clear where someone like him belongs in the United States. In the end, The Searchers remains a classic that lays bare the messiness of the post-Civil War United States and the ways in which the characters are aware of the foundation they're putting down for future generations. In terms of classical storytelling, The Searchers, John Ford's most compelling Western, avoids association with the genre's established precepts. On the surface, Western form is obeyed to the mark. The film stars John Wayne, an actor eternally linked to Westerns, perhaps giving his best performance in any Ford film. Among them, veritable diagrams of filmic convention, such as 1939's Stagecoach. Photographed in the director's cinematic nesting ground of Monument Valley, it contains painterly images of majestic scenery, some of the most remarkable ever captured. Historians and film scholars attest to its supremacy and recognize its influence on the medium and the artists working therein. And yet, the motion picture Ford considered his own masterpiece confronts prior standards, meets issues of revenge and discrimination within a ponderous text, and revises the director's Western model forevermore. By 1955, when production began, The Searchers would be Ford's first Western in 5 years, a personal risk after a number of commercial failures and artistic missteps caused him to contemplate retirement. Having all but invented the genre, as far back as 1917 the director made Westerns, embracing their straight-lined plots and grandiose vistas, building himself an ideal derived from American painting, the era's dime novels, and period lore, all integrated into his own historical reality on film. Pictures like The Iron Horse, My Darling Clementine, and Wagon Master fasten the filmmaker's name to the genre, and they inspire his many followers, among them auteurs like Akira Kurosawa, Ingmar Bergman, and Orson Welles. Questioning the intention of The Searchers comes naturally, as beyond its unequivocal beauty and dramatic intensity, there exists what appear to be incompatible narrative developments, symbolism, and thematic undercurrents signifying the end product as being at odds with itself. Ford rethinks his customary strategy with the film, embracing what other filmmakers like Anthony Mann, Man of the West, The Naked Spur, had already done by this time, and produces an architecturally revisionist Western. The film is revisionist in the sense that the genre's traditional adherence to westward expansion neither represents the primary motivation of its main character nor its narrative campaign. The Searchers begins when Ethan Edwards, Wayne, returns to his brother's home oddly set in a desolate but beautiful section of northern Texas. Raiding Comanches attack soon after, leaving his brother, sister-in-law Martha, and their son dead, and their 2 girls Lucy, Pippa Scott, and Debbie, later played by Natalie Wood, kidnapped. After finding Lucy dead, the next 5 years of Ethan's life entail a Homeric pursuit to find young Debbie, probing rugged landscape and despairing circumstances, enduring the toils of the quest to do what he believes merciful, kill her. Being tainted by years with the Indians Ethan so hates, Debbie, he believes, is unsalvageable. Ethan's wandering elliptical journey is contrary to the very nature of the Western, which, prior to The Searchers, habitually followed a set narrative path forward, specifically in a westerly direction. Good guys are good, bad guys are bad. Intrinsically, the good embark on a mission of manifest destiny to tame the promised land, while the bad embody either the Wild West in need of taming or an obstacle to overcome before proceeding westward. Doing so meant not only charting new and wondrous territory, but finding God's wilderness. Mid-19th century explorers viewed the West as a Garden of Eden, ironically so, since the lawless terrain became a breeding ground for criminality in all its forms. The West was not deemed America, rather that which was to become America. Settled in the eastern colonies were Americans. Beyond the Ohio and Mississippi rivers was a vast rolling wildness waiting to be surveyed and triumphed over. Surmounting that open landscape led to the taming of our instinct to expand and, eventually, settle down with a family. Go west, young man, and grow up with the country, were Horace Greeley's famous words in 1859, suggesting the land of milk and honey was a place to become a man, and claim land and a family in the process. Whereas Ford's early career Westerns ingrain hearty sentimental fondness for writer John L. O'Sullivan's proposed mission to the Pacific, believed to be divine, the director's later films, including The Searchers, understood that finally reaching the last frontier meant finding a dead end. After all the Westerns in Ford's long career, few break from a familiar series of archetypes, the majority concerning men, predominantly white, subject to the perils of the West. The elements, Native Americans, nature, themselves, corruption, and the unknown. Shaped by their stations, characters are exposed to all manner of temptation and influence, thrust about, meanwhile preserving the significance of their charge westward. Beneath these thick narrative brushstrokes resides an underpainting where Ford rests his camera, using low angles to aggrandize heroes and their backdrops, leaving the image stationary so the action within the frame breeds a sense of unrest on the landscape. The Searchers signifies a defining moment in Ford's filmography where he ceases to purport that the push across the plains and over the Rockies was a dreamily romantic voyage of cultural discovery and accomplishment, and instead suggests, even if Hollywood was not prepared to listen, that there are consequences. Ford's message inhabits the realm of the allegorical and psychological, avoiding any outright, condemning dialogue on the matter, like that heard later in Ford's last Western, Cheyenne Autumn from 1964. The film's commentary is hidden deep in the subtext, where observations are occasionally lost or misinterpreted when placed next to its lighter notes of comic relief and romantic folly, no doubt included by the filmmaker for his mainstream audience's benefit. For every harsh outlook declared by John Wayne's racist hero Ethan Edwards, a more frivolous scene follows to ease the viewer, creating a contradictory yet brilliant and strangely rewarding marriage of light entertainment and dark territory. Despite the film's attempts to reduce its own severity, The Searchers sets up a remarkably grim set of conditions, ranging from the landscape to individual character histories. The first iconic shot, mirrored by the film's last iconic shot, of Martha opening the front door seems to frame the outer terrain like a photograph, where within an isolating desert appears, open to the elements, offering a curiously unprotected and vulnerable locale for the Edwards home, particularly in view of subsequent talk of the omnipresent Comanche threat. The unveiled farm remains open to attack, ignorantly, if not arrogantly facing the dangers that surround them. Ethan appears outside, finally returning home, as by the film's 1868 setting, the Civil War has been over for 3 years. Clearly, Ethan refuses to surrender, still sporting his Confederacy garb and lance, clinging to a lost cause, and having long since settled with the accompanying alienation and estrangement. He appears glad to be home and willing pay his way, with a small wealth of suspiciously unscuffed gold, no less. Reverend Captain Clayton, Ward Bond, asserts that Ethan fits a lot of descriptions, implying Ethan is a wanted man. With little respect for religious processions, Ethan openly disrupts both a funeral and a wedding in the expanse of the film, seeing those convictions as weakness. He later shoots out the eyes of a dead Comanche to prevent his spirit from passing into the next world. Ethan does this, he says, not because he believes such a principle, but because the Comanche do. His running motto, "That'll be the day," is spoken in Wayne's swagger of a voice, which he tenders whenever challenged. This hard-edged, opaque description leaves us fascinated but unsure about our hero. Promptly clarified, Ethan's hatred for Native Americans is our only certainty. "A fella could mistake you for a half-breed," he says to his brother's adopted son, Martin Pauley, Jeffrey Hunter. "Not quite. I'm 8th Cherokee, the rest is Welsh and English," replies Martin. "Least that's what they tell me." Ethan sends him a wary look, the small percentage of Indian being blood enough to evoke distrust. And yet, his prejudice does not compare to the racist fury compelling him to continue on his 5-year trail to rescue Debbie from her captors, or rather kill away their influence over her. "Living with Comanches ain't being alive," Ethan growls. He would rather see her dead. Herein rests the easiest assault against the Searchers, that the westerns of John Ford, and therefore many early filmmakers working in the genre, unrepentantly place Native Americans in the role of villains, primarily as ambiguous other figures to be feared. Ford's portrayal was often negative, with a few exceptions, because the director was so bound to that manifest destiny ideal that saw Native Americans as a problem, a people to be swept aside in favor of westward expansion. Purveyed in the ongoing myths about the period, they were the noble savages to contrast the quintessential frontiersmen of the cowboys. Today, scholars use the term Indians versus Native Americans in specific reference to their Hollywoodization and exploitation, and in regard to their context within the Western genre. Indeed, Ford realized his use of Indians was unfair, even contemptible. "I've killed more Indians than Custer, Beecher, and Chivington put together," he admitted, "and people in Europe always want to know about the Indians. Let's face it, we've treated them very badly. It's a blot on our shield. We've cheated and robbed, killed, murdered, massacred, and everything else. But they kill one white man and God. Out come the troops." Ford was sympathetic to the cause of Native Americans off-screen, and in later films, including The Searchers, he avoids showing any of the more atrocious acts committed by Indians within the story, just the white man's retaliation. For example, Ethan arrives at his brother's home after it has been set afire and his family ravaged. He finds Lucy dead, though her body never appears on screen. Even Debbie's kidnapping is suggested with only a glare from the film's villain, Chief Scar, Henry Brandon, and his looming shadow. Though employing them as villainous characters in broadly defined yarns, Ford also censured the white man for his cruel, genocidal attitude toward the Indian. Consider the scene where Ethan shoots down as many buffalo as he can, hoping to dwindle the Indians' food supply. But more than just food, buffalo represent the very livelihood of Native Americans, as Francis Parkman wrote. The buffalo supplies them with almost all the necessities of life, with habitations, food, clothing, and fuel, with strings for their bows, with thread, cordage, and trail ropes for their horses, with coverings for their saddles, with vessels to hold water, with boats to cross streams, with glue, and with the means of purchasing all that they desire from the traders. With each buffalo gunned down, Ethan destroys the livelihood of his enemy, ostensibly executing a group of Indians with every precise shot. Ford saw Native Americans as a natural part of the Western landscape, not implicitly violent unless tempted by the intruding, cruel white man. His silent-era epic The Iron Horse features villain Indians led by a white man. Drums Along the Mohawk and Fort Apache each offer Indian attacks only after being provoked by white man's disturbance of their land. Their violence is sharp and cunning, but in reprisal to broken agreements and double crosses dealt by white people. Ford would prefer an understanding of cultures and includes Martin Pauly as a symbol of hope for both races to merge communally and develop a peaceful understanding, and thus allows Martin to enter a fruitful romance with the neighbor girl Lori Jorgensen, Vera Miles. Furthermore, Ethan's eventual, shall we say, tolerance of Martin, allowing the half-breed to accompany him on the 5-year trek, also suggests his racism will subside in the end. Nevertheless, The Searchers implicates itself on a number of occasions. Take the frivolous subplot where Martin's trades hats for a blanket and squaw wife by mistake. He angrily kicks her down a hill in rejection, a scene meant to provide humor, but instead is cringe-inducing in its heartlessness. Barring such light comedy at the Native Americans' expense, the film addresses racism and sparks communication by Ethan's inner battle to overcome his bigotry, prefacing the external arguments made in Cheyenne Autumn, an absolute reproach against the mistreatment, segmentation, and relocation of Native tribes. Hollywood's defense of Native Americans, well, there was really little of that to speak of. And so, Ford's film does not sanction or regret racism. It simply acknowledges its existence and presents a story wherein its reality fuels his protagonist's dissension. That in itself steers a new and important cultural breakthrough in cinema. The acknowledgement that there is undeniably a problem requiring attention, that a racist hero is explicitly an inharmonious one. Ford gives Ethan 5 long years on an interpersonal odyssey to resolve his existential dilemma, developing Ethan and Martin's relationship as they camp together every night, a devout racist and a man otherwise defined by his hybridity. Perhaps that time softens Ethan's hatred, and perhaps not. Ethan's inward journey, where through he realizes his love for Debbie is greater than his hatred for Scar and the Comanche Indians, characterizes the film's fundamental struggle. Whether or not Ethan and Martin actually find Debbie is less the fear than what Ethan will do when he finds her. Will he kill her? Ford asks that we question our hero, his motives and origins. He is a duty-bound military man crutching on his anguished past, seemingly a living representation of westward expansion and its immanent flaws. And yet, Ethan is unusually familiar with Indian customs. When Ethan discovers the location of the group responsible for Debbie's kidnapping, he and Martin ride to survey the situation, posing as traitors. Ethan and Scar come to stand opposite each other, racial and cultural antitheses, but otherwise the same role. Mirroring images, they stand on equal footing, Wayne a few inches taller than Brandon, both renegades, both acquainted with the other's culture. Ethan reveals he speaks Comanche, Scar speaks American. A clue to Ethan's hatred for Comanche Indians appears early in the film, when the younger Debbie goes to her hiding place before Scar first attacks the Edwards home. She kneels down in the graveyard by a headstone, which, appearing for only a few frames, reads, "Here lies Mary Jane Edwards killed by Comanches May 12, 1852, a good wife and mother in her 41st year." 16 years earlier, was Ethan's own mother massacred by Comanches? Does this motivate his relentless pilgrimage and remorseless treatment of Indians? And his knowledge of Comanche rituals, taking the time to learn their language, is this merely getting to know one's enemy, or something more? The Searchers resists giving answers, or even playing out like a typical Western where the hero kills the villain by letting Ethan kill Scar, and instead places emphasis on the circular narrative of Ethan's psychological disarray. In the finale, when Ethan, Martin, Captain Clayton, and his men charge the Comanche camp, Scar is killed by Martin. Ethan is left with his own demons to conquer, but not before he scalps Scar's dead body with tragic irony, further identifying himself as analogous to his enemy. Ethan embraces the moment all the same, an act originally introduced to Native Americans by the French, though rarely is that historical association made. This act of Ethan's scalping seems to suggest a crescendo of horror. If Ethan breaks a code of honor by scalping Scar, surely Debbie's fate can be no better. In the film's most memorable scene, one of the greatest single moments of all cinema, Ethan emerges from Scar's tent on his horse and spots Debbie, who, dressed in full Comanche attire, runs in terror. Ethan chases her down a hill and corners her, Martin trailing behind yelling "No!" for Ethan not to do what he is intended to do from the outset. Ethan gets off his horse and picks Debbie up, raises her in the air like a child, the fear radiating from her. He lowers her into his arms and says, "Let's go home, Debbie." Could it be that after Scar's death and scalping some valve releases Ethan's rage, permitting him to finally view Debbie as not an object taken and since tainted, but as his niece? In the face of saving Debbie, Ethan can neither claim his redemption nor have the happy ending the film's other characters enjoy. For the last shot, Ford places the camera in the front door of the Jorgensens', Debbie's new home. The shot pulls back as the Jorgensens enter, with Debbie, Martin, and Laurie following behind, the perfect symmetry again framing the wild desert. Ethan remains just outside, gripping his arm as if injured. Ford seems to suggest that Ethan has not yet settled whatever conflict still rages inside. Is this Ethan's lingering racism? In a way, does he still want Debbie dead? If so, he cannot truly be at peace, and so he must continue his drive. Ford denies his audience any closure with Ethan's character, leaving clarity of purpose and motivations altogether ambiguous, intentionally so. He altered the script by Frank S. Nugent, based on the novel by Alan LeMay, deleting any explanation expounded within. Ford goes against the script, which featured a happy ending complete with Ethan entering the Jorgensens' home. He removed explicatory dialogue that shed light on why Ethan does not kill Debbie, and he added the scene where Ethan scalps Scar. With these scenes changed, backed by his confidence in his own vision, John Ford amends The Searchers from a traditional Hollywood Western into an uncommon human tragedy. The director even worked closely with Stan Jones, writer of the film's song The Searchers, which plays over the opening credits and the final scene in front of the Jorgensens. Westerns are often bookended with a song, but none as appropriate as this, informed by Ford's influence on the lyrics. What makes a man to wander? What makes a man to roam? What makes a man leave bed and board and turn his back on home? A man will search his heart and soul, go searching way out there. His peace of mind he knows he'll find, but where? Oh Lord, Lord, where? Ride away, ride away, ride away. Ford was particularly proud of The Searchers, as was Wayne, who named his son Ethan after his character. The film's initial critical reception, however, lacked passion, as did its box office receipts, and Ford was devastated by its apparent dismissal. But the picture's reputation would grow over time, earning recognition on top film, lists such as AFI and Sight and Sound, and through homages paid by modern filmmakers. Using the film's influential framework by borrowing a familiar lead character and surrounding outline, directors like Steven Spielberg, with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Martin Scorsese, with Taxi Driver, have helped express the film's importance and lasting authority. Western filmmakers like Anthony Mann, Sergio Leone, and Clint Eastwood have paid tribute by conceiving revisionist westerns not wholly reliant on the white conquest plot, and that contain a plagued main character on parallel with Ethan Edwards. John Ford's authorship of a story exploring the human costs in the conventional western is the most significant mark of the film, seeing as by 1956, the director had committed almost 50 westerns to celluloid. The Searchers begins to unravel like a linear Western yarn, but is thrown into revolution by Ethan, a tragic hero fated to forever prospect his soul for a golden answer. Subversive in structure, the film orbits around its environment, broods over its emotions, and offers no finality to Ethan Edwards' conflict. Cinema's most renowned idealist of the American West suddenly altered the schema, which he played a central role in establishing, and in that welcomes a massive reconsideration of those romantic, time-honored Western principles that span the genre. The Searchers receives an abysmal score for realism from a historian who calls it just ridiculous. Directed by the legendary John Ford, the 1956 Western epic is set during the Texas Indian Wars and follows a Civil War veteran accompanied by his adopted nephew, who spends years searching for his niece who was abducted by Comanches. John Wayne leads the cast alongside Jeffrey Hunter, Vera Miles, Ward Bond, and Natalie Wood. In a video from Insider, the cowboy and Old West historian Michael Grauer rated Wild West scenes in movies and television for realism, including the depiction of cowboys and the Comanche in The Searchers. Watch the portion of the video below, starting at the 10:36-minute mark. In the video, Grauer takes issue with the Native American battle tactics on display and the very depiction of cowboys versus Indians, which he calls a very common misconception that almost never happened. However, he did call Wayne's character's costume fairly accurate. Overall, he rated the scene an abysmal 210 for realism. Read his full comments below. Despite giving it an abysmal rating for realism, the historian acknowledges that The Searchers is a great film. Critics and audiences concur, as The Searchers is widely considered to be one of the greatest and most influential movies ever made, not just within the Western genre. However, its historical accuracy is up for debate and has been the subject of critical reinterpretation over the years. Its portrayal of Native Americans, particularly the Comanche, is fraught with historical inaccuracies and stereotypes, many of which Grauer describes. The Searchers primarily depicts the Comanche as violent savages, which oversimplifies and distorts the complex and varied cultures of Native American tribes. Over the course of his quest, Wayne's character clearly becomes less interested in rescuing his niece and more intent on exacting revenge against the Comanches, a harsh attitude that is startling to many viewers, particularly later generations. Additionally, the character of Scar, the Comanche chief, is played by a white actor, Henry Brandon, in heavy makeup, reflecting the era's tendency toward red-face casting and reinforcing harmful racial caricatures. Grauer also explains how The Searchers is inspired by the true story of Cynthia Ann Parker, a white woman who was kidnapped by Comanches as a child and lived with them for many years. However, unlike Parker, who integrated into Comanche society and had a family with a Comanche chief, the film's counterpart is depicted as needing rescue from her captors. While The Searchers is a celebrated Western movie that grapples with the theme of revenge, its historical accuracy is compromised by its racial stereotypes and lack of nuanced representation of Native American cultures and experiences. The supporting cast. Antonio Moreno does good work as the proprietor of a cantina, and Hank Worden stands out as a half-wit scout who is sane enough when it comes to Indian fighting. Wayne and Hunter both are great at preserving the quarrelsome affections of tough men forced to spend too much time in each other's company. Jack Murray's editing is something special, as is the art direction of Frank Hodling and James B. Max Steiner score. Utilizing such folk themes as Gary Owen has both the intimacy and magnitude demanded by the production. The whole effort is one of the major achievements in the career of Marion C. Cooper. Jack Moffat originally published on March 13, 1956, Texas 1868. Ethan Edwards, John Wayne, finally returns to his childhood home. 3 years after the end of the American Civil War, he evades questions about where he's been, though. He was emphatically not in California. Ethan gets reacquainted with his brother Aaron's family wife, Martha, eldest daughter Lucy, Nenson Ben, and Debbie. Lana Wood, who was born shortly after Ethan left 8 years ago. Uncle Ethan takes a shine to Debbie, gifting her a medal he isn't as pleased by Aaron's adopted son. Martin Holly Jeffrey Hunter, whose 108 Cherokee ancestry is clearly visible, even though he himself had saved the boy from a Comanche attack that orphaned him years ago. The next morning, a posy led by Texas Ranger and Reverend Samuel Johnston. Clayton Ward Bond arrives at the ranch. It seems that rustlers hit the nearby Jorgensen Ranch, and they need all the searchers they can get. Also in the party are the eccentric MOS Harper Hank Wardens, aging Lars Jorgensen, John Quinn, and his son, Brad Harry. KY Jr., who is Lucy's sweetheart, Ethan, volunteers himself for Aaron's place, despite some skepticism from Captain Clayton Martin joins. thinking it a way to prove himself to Uncle Ethan just as Martin is voicing his suspicions about the rustlers' trail. Some hours later, the Posey comes across cattle killed without their meat being taken. They realize that this was a distraction the Comanche intend to strike as a war party at one of the unprotected sites. It's too late. By the time they get back, Aaron, Ben, and Martha are dead, and Lucy and Debbie have been abducted. The men set out in search of the war band, and soon enough find what's left of Lucy. Brad soon follows her into the grave, although it seems a lost cause. To find Debbie before she dies or suffers the worst fate, Ethan vows to keep searching until he finds her, and Martin supports him. It will be years before the pair reach the end of this trail. This is considered one of the great Western movies, starting with the wonderful scenery of Monument Valley filling in for the flatland of West. Texas Ethan Edwards is an unusual role for John Wayne. He's a man with a murky past and an unregenerate Confederate still wearing pieces of his Johnny Reb uniform. 3 years later, he very much did not surrender his sword and presumably still fully supports the cause of slavery. Ethan refuses to discuss what he did after the war, but it's implied to be at least shady, if not illegal. The medal he gives Debbie is conspicuously neither Union or Confederate out of universe. It's Serbian. Ethan is openly racist towards people of Native American descent. Other people are less open about it. He has no compunction about ambushing opponents and shooting them in the back, desecrates a corpse out of cussedness, and kills more buffalo than he needs for food just to deny them to the natives by the end of the movie. It's clear that Martin is the actual hero, wanting to still rescue Debbie now, played by Natalie Wood, while Ethan thinks it will be more merciful to kill her immediately. Eventually, the searchers learned that Debbie was last seen with Chief Scar Henry Brandon, a Comanche who constantly keeps on the move with his band and often lies about where he's going next to evade trackers. He has his reasons for hating the white men and seems to be Ethan's opposite. There's a subplot about Martin's sweetheart Lori Jorgensen, Vera Miles, being courted by the rather crass Charlie McSay Ken Curtis while he's gone. It's understandable that she is tempted, given that Martin writes only one letter in 5 years and mentions his short-lived accidental marriage to Kamani. Maiden look bua areta during the course of the missive. The comedy here can be a bit grating. Speaking of comedy, Look's part in the story is treated as hilarious by everyone who hears about it. Since Martin doesn't speak, Kami Ethan didn't bother warning him about the customs, and she is treated poorly by Martin as a result. And then her part ends tragically. At least she's played by a Native American, unlike the other major parts which had white actors in tan makeup, and the Comanche extras were played by Navajo, making the background chatter hilarious. If you understand that language, Hollywood's gotten a little better at appropriate casting over the years. A little better, the ending is particularly striking. Most of the surviving characters find at least some happiness. But Ethan realizes that he can never truly join them, and the door closes with him. Still outside, content notes, violence often ending in death. Several corpses are implied to be particularly gruesome, but we never see them. Death of children, rape is implied. Some rescued white captive are traumatized or re-traumatized by the rescue into seeming insanity racism. Martin kicks Look when she tries to sleep near him. Animals are killed. There are parts of this movie that haven't aged well or are a bit grating, but overall, it's one of the greats and well worth watching, especially since the acknowledgement of racism was very rare in westerns of the time period, especially by protagonists. It also allows you to fill in a lot of blanks. Yourself, by implication, parents of younger viewers may want to screen the movie first to see if their kids are up to it. This film, directed by John Fort, screenplay by Frank Nent, starring John Wayne, Jeffrey Hunter, Vermes War Bond, Natalie Wood, cinematography edited by Jack Marais, music by Ma Steiner. Production company CV Whitney, pictures distributed by Warner Brothers. Release date May 16, 1956 in Chicago. Theater running time 119 minutes. Country, United States. Language, English. Budget $3.75 million. So guys, this is the review of The Searchers movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.